Get ready to hear the truth and facts about everything biker. A show not immune to the facts and says it like it is. Get ready and keep the throttle cracked wide open. Motorcycle Madhouse is about to take you on a wild ride. Now, the thorn in every Leo side, James Hollywood Machikari.
Welcome to this edition of Motorcycle Madhouse. This is episode 31 and I'm James Hollywood Machikari, and today we are going to go back to our roots when the wild image of bikers kicked in high gear. Yes, we're going to be talking about Hollister and some of the men who started bikers on the wild ride we have today.
Now it's time to crack that throttle and let's get this show on the road.
He was a side gunner on the B-24 Liberator in the Pacific Theater on an aircraft named Pacific Tramp. Fueled with the zest largely unknown outside of WWII combat vets, Wino Willie Forkner and other early members of the Boozefighters Motorcycle Club party with other clubs and the citizens of Hollister at its famous 1947 Gypsy Tour. Prominent at that party, Wino Willie was used later to teach the cast of The Wild One, a movie inspired vaguely by that event, how to dress and act as bikers. Although the movie in general did not depict Wino's values, it impacted and enshrined Hollister as the birthplace of the American biker, and Wino Willie as its model. As benefits, a social catalyst, Wino Willie remained unchanged amidst the changes he helped provoke. On May 2nd, 1996, Michael Kerkorkian of the LA Times sat down with Wino Willie and J.D., who founded the legendary Boozefighters MC. I'll put the article link in the show notes if you want to take a look at it. In the article, Michael was able to capture the true meaning of how everything started out for us bikers. Before there was Sonny and the Hells Angels, before there was Marlon Brando and the Wild One, there was Wild Willie and J.D., and the South Central Los Angeles Motorcycle Club called the Boozefighters. On the 4th of July, 1947, the Boozefighters invaded the Central California hamlet of Hollister, and as Life magazine memorialized it, took over the town. The incident set up a growing fascination with outlaw bikers, culminating in Brando's legendary The Wild One in 1954. With one exchange that still reverberates, "What are you rebelling against, Johnny?" Brando's character was asked. "What do you got?" he snapped. Willie Forkner and J.D. Cameron, the last surviving founders of the Boozefighters, look back on their legacy with amusement. To visit with them in Cameron's La Miranda home is to recall a distant time when post-war America was bursting with unfocused energy. It was a time when you could have a fist fight with someone, and when it was over, you'd have a beer together, says Cameron, who made his living in the freight unloading and trucking businesses, where he employed Willie. This was the way before all this guns and dope crap. "Yeah, we just had a little fun," says Forkner. A barrel-chested World War II vet with pinkies as thick as thumbs who lives in Fort Bragg, California, and still rides his motorcycle. "We didn't do anything wrong. We happened in Hollister, they remember, started with city-approved street racing on the main drag, San Benito Street." Well, maybe a little more, J.D. allows that he may have had a few fistfights. And then Wino Willie begins talking about a town drunk who came into one of the bars. "Me, Kokomo, and Gashouse Wilson started buying him wine," Willie says. "After his third glass, he fell over. So we tied him to his wheelchair, tied the chair to some car, and dragged him around town. I looked back, and he had fallen out of that chair." So we put him on the hood and started driving again. Slowly, but he looked like he wasn't breathing, so we thought he was dead. We dropped him in an alley, covered him up, and papers and that took over. Man, later that day, when I was in jail, I looked over and there he was, making a ruckus. It's damn hard to kill a drunk. Wino Willie got his nickname as a 7-year-old boy in Fresno when he would visit local wineries and indulge in the latest vintage. Had landed in Hollister's jail on the charges of inciting a riot. Of course, he tells a different story. They had arrested Red, another one of the Boozefighters, for drunk and disorderly, and a bunch of guys had gone over to the jail to break him out. Man, I went over there and told the fellas, let's forget this Wild West stuff. Red needs a rest. But of course, the cops figured I was the leader, and they grabbed me. Later that day, the judge says he'll let me out if I listen to my wife. I told him, hell no, I haven't listened to her yet, and I'm not going to start yet. He said, laughing. What caused the national stir was not the incident itself, or a San Francisco Chronicle article that described the events as the worst 40 hours in the history of Hollister, but a single photograph in Life magazine. It showed a large, leather-jacketed man guzzling beer on a Harley with a pile of broken beer bottles lying near his front tire. JD and Wino to this day are infuriated by that photo, saying it was staged. Life's one-page layout led to Harper's Weekly article by Frank Rooney, The Cyclist Raid, which led to the Brando movie, which sent the image of bikers downhill faster than a wheelie on a steel hill climb. I hated that movie, says Cameron. The most glaring discrepancy between the actual event and the movie was that, unlike the film, in which a sleepy town is stunned by an unexpected invasion of a motorcycle gang, Hollister was waiting with open arms for thousands of bikers to converge there. For more than a decade, the American Motorcycle Association had sanctioned an event in Hollister. So on the 4th of July weekend in 1947, an estimated 4,000 motorcyclists descended on the city of 5,000. What set that year's event apart from the others was that this time, 15 members of the Boozefighters rode north from Los Angeles. Although the Boozefighters were never mentioned in the Life spread or the Brando movie, word of mouth spread. Their name was a perfect fit, and soon all the biker world knew. The Boozefighters had formed in 1946 at the American Cafe, a small beer joint on the Firestone Boulevard near Hooper Avenue, just north of Watts. Many of the members, including Cameron and Willie, were married. They were, by and large, a bunch of guys who loved to race motorcycles and drink beer. Cameron was born in 1915 in Oregon and began racing motorcycles when he was 15. He was rejected for the war because of injuries from a series of crashes. He came to Los Angeles and bought a small freight train unloading business where he met Willie in 1942. Willie, 5 years younger, had grown up in Fresno, where he expanded his early appreciation of fermented grape juice. Survival in the Pacific during World War II developed his zest for kicks. One day, the Army Air Corps took him off of his B-24 bomber because it needed him on another. While on the mission over Iwo Jima, he watched in horror as his regular B-24 exploded and crashed. When I came back, we were hanging out at the club and we figured, let's have fun. This is what we fought to protect, Willie said. The days after the vets came back were a special time, added Cameron. People were happy the war was over and we just wanted to enjoy life. Goldie Miller, a Fremont High School graduate, met Cameron and Willie at the All-American Club. They were some real characters, says Miller, 74 at the time of this writing. Herself a free spirit back then, they just loved to party. They wanted to be big-time professional racers, but that never happened. Sometimes they go out of the parking lot and duke it out, then come back in for another beer. Miller was at the Hollister event, but her recollection is fuzzy at best. I don't remember a whole lot. I wasn't having too much fun. If I was making a book, I wouldn't have to give any of them a chance to make it to 40. But, really, they were real nice people. And you knew anybody was going to mess with you wasn't going to mess with them. So you had no worries. The next year in Riverside, another ruckus promoted the Boozefighters' reputation for wildness. The club continued to be active through the 1950s, then simmered down. By 1970, the aged members had scattered throughout the country. Cameron bought a trucking business and kept in touch with Willie, who was working as a trucker. Willie and Cameron, if heart problems don't hold him back, may be heading back to Hollister. Now a city of 24,000 back in 1996 when this article was written, bills itself as the earthquake capital of the world. Hollister is already vibrating about the 50th anniversary of the invasion next year. Police and merchants believe that as many as 100,000 motorcycle enthusiasts from around the world may converge there on the 4th of July weekend in 1997. Several groups are vying to put on the trail run celebration this year. At Johnny's, one of the bars the Boozefighters patronized in 1947, owner Tyson is looking forward to the day when the bikers return to Hollister. I can't wait. We're going to do big business, Tyson said. I'm not really concerned about violence. Heck, even the Garlic Festival in nearby Gilroy has its problems. Across the street at Bob's Video, owner Bob Benzawelia is also in favor of the event. People will be coming here from all over the world because they know about Hollister from the movie, he said. This is truly holy ground for motorcyclists. It's its mecca. Today, the Boozefighters clubs still exist, but it is centered in Fort Worth. Comparisons to the original club are like comparing the cushy, soft-tailed, muffled rides of today's bikes with the rigid frame, roaring Harleys of old. The club, with chapters in Virginia, New York, and California, has strict rules of conduct, and members include doctors, lawyers, and law enforcement officers. Wino Willie and JD sneer at the new leadership. When I met them, they dressed like business people. Wino Willie says, today it's all about greed. We never made a dime off of this whole thing, and we didn't care either. Wino Willie visited JD again last week. He told me, well, Wino, I'm dying. Wino said, and unless he gets this pig valve operation, he will, but he's not a complainer. Cameron, a tall, well-built man, says merely that he's going in for the operation Tuesday. Then he says, we just wanted to have some fun, and we sure did. One more question lingers. What were the real wild ones rebelling against? And JD pauses for a few seconds. Well, I guess I'm rebelling against discrimination. You know, all kinds. But for me, just because someone's a biker, they got rules against you. And Wino Willie, I guess it's the establishment that spent 3 years fighting for. He says, you take off the khakis and the blue and put on some jeans and leather jacket and immediately you become an asshole. Wino Willie, the original wild one, passed away on June 23rd of 1997 at age 76. His parting words to the biker community, as we now go together on the last phase of our journey on Earth, We must remind you, the destination was never in question, but the trip getting there, we will cherish in our hearts forever. Our memories, our friends, and our family. Well, it doesn't get any better than that. So ride free, be loved, and God bless. Wino Willie. You know, that quote from Wino Willie embodies the true biker. Not what the mainstream media tries to portray his bikers as. Bikers are not gun runners, dope dealers, or a menace to society. No, bikers are hard-working, blue-collar workers of this country who built its skyscrapers and its bridges, fought its wars, built the roads, and delivered the goods that are a necessity in everyday life. No, bikers are the heart of America and the last vestige of what it means to be truly free. Guys like Wino Willie set the true lived example of rebellion and what it meant to be free. This segment wouldn't be complete without Wino telling his own story. So here's an interview Wino gave on Hollister and how the Boozefighters came about. And the rest, that's all history.
One that was in the Boozefighters was a veteran, and we all come back with the same thing in mind. Jesus, now we can kind of play and do hairy things and nobody's shooting at our ass. That made a hell of a difference in life, you know. You wasn't really scared much about for the fuzz or about anything. It just, when there's no bullets flying, by God, you can have a pretty good time. So that's when I started hanging around the All-American again, because I'd been there before the war, and finally joined up with the 13 Rebels. They had the first AMA-sanctioned quarter mile at El Cajon, California. And being the first race since the war, they didn't perform too good. Me and Blackie was up in the grandstand with the public, and the crowd kind of hissing and booing, and me and old Blackie sucking on that bottle of booze, and I said, Jesus Christ, man, we could put on a better show than this son of a bitch. So we staggered out to the parking lot there, and the road run right down to the big gate they had at the back of the pits there. And he said, well, how the hell are we going to get in there? I said, well, you're going to go right through that goddamn gate. He said, holy shit. I said, all you got to do is just lay down in the goddamn tank and hang on. When you get close to the gate, you'll go through. So we took off going full tilt, and I never looked up at that summit because I was intent on seeing where I'm going through the boards. And shit, the next thing I know, the boards are flying, and I'm getting sideways, and when I get it straightened up, I'm headed right down the straightaway. Son of a bitch, I don't know how the hell that ever happened. So I just hooked it all on. I thought that bastard's right alongside of me. Shit, he just chicken shitted out, never even hit the goddamn gate. Just me by myself. And of course, the damn grandstand come alive. They just jumped up and hooping and hollering. And I made a lap around there, and the wires come out with the flag rack, and like he's going to hit me over the head, and I took a little sachet toward the infield. He dropped that and run. Made another goddamn lap. How the hell I didn't fall down, I don't know. So he come out with the chair the next lap around, and I run him back into the infield. I think I made up to fourth lap. I think I finally fell on my ass in the south turn, and J.D. John come running over and pulled the mag wires off this son of a bitch, and I sit there like an asshole trying to crank it for 15 or 20 minutes before I realized it ain't going to run. So when I got back in Friday night club meeting with the 13 Rebels, Jesus, they climbed all over my ass. You son of a bitch, you're flying our colors, you know, destroying our name. And them bastards, they sit there and said, well, you know, the war come along and now we all kind of got things together here. We don't do that kind of shit no more. I said, well, that's good enough for me. I don't belong in this goddamn organization. Give them my sweater, and went to the All-American, proceeded to have a few old missions at 10 cents a bottle, and I was saying to those assholes, we got to start another club. Well, there's an old dude there, the local drunk, Walt Porter, rode a 45, but he's drunk all the time, day and night. And he was a hell of a jokester, tell jokes, you'd laugh your ass off. And so we're saying, well, what are we going to call this goddamn thing, you know? And old Walt Porter says, call it Boozefighters. So that, we laughed over that for about a half hour, and that's where the name come from. We had three organizations at the time there, L.A. and San Pedro and San Francisco. And we all showed up. We met in Hollister. We got there the day before the 3-day event was supposed to start. And, well, Jesus, we go through the whole ritual that night, drinking and raising hell. And the next night, I think we get Red Dahlgren got through in jail for just plain drunk. And everybody's in the big hotel bar room there. And somebody said something about, well, let's go down and break Dahlgren out of jail. Well, I didn't pay no attention to him. But those assholes, there's about 30 or 40 or 50 of them, whatever. They go down to that little 2-bit jail, and they're standing out front figuring out how they just bust the door down or what. There's 3 cops standing inside their local fuzz. My old lady said, they're down there going to break Red out of jail. And I thought, Jesus Christ, that's kind of stupid. That bastard's drunk. He needs the rest. He's got a bunk to sleep on now instead of the car or the trailer. So I'm running down there and told him, hey, Red needs the rest, so, man, he'll be out in the morning. Let's get back to this hearty partying. Well, there's 3 cops inside. They're looking through the windows, and they don't know what the hell I'm doing there. But I get all the crowd going back to the bar, and if son of a bitch, they don't come out the door and grab me, throw me in jail for inciting a riot. How mistaken can you get? But I stayed in jail. Went to court in the morning, and I was still about half stiff. Kokomo was in jail. Well, all my friends were there, so what the hell, it was a nice place to be. It was quite a trip. I was glad to be around to participate with the boys. There was a lot of love and a lot of competition. I love to race that Big Bear, across the desert, the fire breaks, the riverbeds up the back road and the snow and the bullshit, whatever was there, you had to put up with, And when you start one of those things, you got 500 to 700 riders, and the highway patrol leads us down the highway, and then there comes a break in the fence, and they turn us loose, and you start on a fire break. In 1948, I bought a brand new AJS bronze head scrambler just to ride the Big Bear. So the bomb goes off, and I'm just going like a bomb, And the first couple of checks, I'm in something like 10th or 12th, signing in on a check, so I know I got this race made. Ain't no way that nobody going to blow my ass off. Well, somewhere along the line, the flywheel slipped, and those mattresses and AJs had a habit of doing that. Those Englishmen I don't know, they couldn't understand what kind of torture we give a fucking engine. The flywheel slips, so the vibration starts, and I'm giving it this shit. And I said, hell, I ain't going to blow a $600 machine up to get a lousy trophy. There's no money involved in this son of a bitch, $100 or something. So I just backed off, and that fucking J.D. John come by in that goddamn F8 and slapped me on the back, and I said, fuck them flywheels, we're racing. Man, I'm telling you, we got going. In one little riverbed stretch there, we passed 45 guys, never put a foot down. They're all pumping in the sand. We're sailing, man. We're going, We get up there by Valley Yurmo, and the fucking ice is on the road, and it's treacherous, son of a bitch. People are laying on the sides of the road, and we're going dead heat, going like this, and we see all them people stretched across the road, and I said, John, you son of a bitch, I think that's the end of it here. Something's wrong here. So we're trying to stop to get down. Both of us go on our ass. We slide across the finish line. That prick beat me across the finish line on his ass. So we go to 3-point when they're issuing the trophies, right? So there's a goddamn redhead was the secretary, big, tall redhead. She kind of had a hots for me for some reason or other. I don't know why. But she gave me 37th place. That was 37th place we ended up going across the ice, And John jumped up. He said, you son of a bitch, I beat you across that line. I said, John, I got the trophy. It says Wino Willie on the son of a bitch. It's about that high. A wine glass shot, He still pisses about that. He said, you asshole. But I'll tell you, that's one hell of a racer. He had no fear, that guy.
Hi, this is James Hollywood Machikari, host of the Motorcycle Madhouse and the Biker Angle over on YouTube. If you're looking for up-to-date biker news, then Insane Throttle is the place to be. Daily editorials and news that is dedicated to the biker scene. Come on over and join the #1 internet biker news site at HarleyLiberty.com. Or come on over to the Insane Throttle's new YouTube channel for the Biker Angle, hosted by myself. New episodes every Thursday at 8 p.m. and Sundays at 8 a.m. Be there!
The biker so fat when he stepped on the scale and said to be continued. We now give you the adventures of Butterball!
A road-weary old butterball walks into a saloon to have a cold beer after a long, dusty ride. At the end of the bar, he sees a rather good-looking lady of the evening. She smiles and asks if he's looking for a good time. Well, haven't been some time since his last snarl, and he accepts. After agreeing on a price, she escorts him up to the room, and they start humping. After about 10 minutes of furious banging, the old biker asks, "So, babe, how am I doing?" She replies,
"You're doing about 3 knots.
3 knots? What's that mean?" She said,
You're not hard, you're not in, and you're not getting your money back."
So fine. Everybody ask me how I know. I smiled at them and said she told me so fine. Everybody ask me how I know. I smiled at them and said she told me so fine. Everybody ask me how I know. I smiled at them and said she told me so fine.
Hollywood's Motorcycle Madhouse on iHeartRadio.
"How's up and comers in the music scene? Let's get this show rocking for the next segment."
Rocking us into the next segment, we got Falling to Flux, Living in Pain.
So dude, you got a reason, pain.
Validus Throttle and Validus Fitness custom clothing line is bringing the motorcycle and fitness culture together. Be heard and stand out in the crowd with our custom apparel and clothing. If we don't have what you're looking for, we'll bring your ideals to life. We're also proud sponsors of Motorcycle Madhouse on Insane Throttle. Check us out on www.outoftheboxclothingandproductsllc.com. We have great feedback and we'll do our best to keep it that way.
Hollywood's Motorcycle Madhouse on iHeartRadio.
Welcome to this edition of Motorcycle Madhouse News Around the World. Who's a baseball fan out there? Well, I know I am, but I know you better duck when there's flying hot dogs flying at you. A baseball fan was left bloodied and bruised after a large, furry mascot accidentally shot her in the face with a hot dog fired from an oversized cannon. Philadelphia Phillies supporter Kathy McVeigh was sat in the stands when the green mascot, Philly Fanatic, that rascal, started riding around the field in his mobile hot dog launcher. Miss McVeigh said the wayward wiener, wrapped in duct tape, hit her like a ton of bricks as the Fanatic fired away. The flying hot dog knocked her glasses off her head and sent the woman to the hospital for a scan of her brain to make sure she didn't suffer concussion. Can you imagine that, going to a hospital and get a concussion from a flying hot dog? The bizarre scene unfolded as Miss McVeigh watched the Phillies take on the visiting St. Louis Cardinals. Boo! At Citizens Bank Park on Monday night. She was sat behind home plate, where a batter swings at pitches all day long, when the 6'6" Fanatic emerged from his usual hot dog ritual, wearing a white chef's hat and apron. The longtime mascot, one of the most favorite in North America thanks to his shenanigans. Personally, I like the chicken that used to be at Wrigley Field. But anyway, launches hot dogs towards fans from a cannon on the back of a small utility vehicle. Miss McVeigh said she was unable to block the hot dog as it soared towards her head because she has a shoulder injury that needs surgery. She told ABC6, "The next thing I know, he shot in our direction, and BAM! It hit me like a ton of bricks. My glasses flew off." Afterwards, Miss McVeigh of Plymouth, Pennsylvania, was taken to the hospital for a CAT scan. She only suffered a hematoma in one of her ears, or actually her eyes. Why it has ears in this article, I have no idea. Anyway, all the ear goes, it was swollen by her ears. And it left her bruised. She told local media that she understands the way she was injured is absurd and people might find it funny, but she doesn't mind if people have a laugh over her misfortune. Moral of the story? Watch out for flying hot dogs when you go to the baseball game. In other news, teenagers somehow got her head stuck in an exhaust pipe. Yeah, she really got her head oh my God. Anyway, we've done something silly after a few too many beverages, and for the 19-year-old Caitlin Storm, that meant testing out whether or not her head would fit inside a stranger's truck exhaust pipe. At the end of her scientific study, Caitlin discovered she could indeed fit her head inside it. The difficulty was getting her head back out again. She was stuck for 45 minutes at the Woodstock Music Festival in Minnesota. You guys are weird up there in Minnesota, let me tell you. You raise them weird. Eventually being cut free by firefighters using an electric saw. We were just all having fun, and I saw the big exhaust pipe, and I was like, hey, my head could probably fit in that. Caitlin told the leaders of the fire department. So I tried it. I did fit, but it didn't want to come back out. But as soon as I tasted freedom, she was cited by the sheriff's department for underage drinking. She then had to apologize to the truck's owner. I remember getting my head unstuck and just looked at him and apologized, and he said, "No, I'm just glad you're okay. Don't worry about it." Caitlin said. She and the pipe have since become borderline celebrities in their town. This is how we raise our kids today, to stick their heads in exhaust pipes. My God. So, lastly, no to sex on roundabouts. Norway's telling its high school graduates. Norway's high school graduates should refrain from running around naked across bridges and having sex on roundabouts lest they give drivers too much of a surprise, the National Transport Regulator said on Wednesday. Norway's annual post-graduation period called Rust last week involves partying and drinking heavily, and tends to challenge public morals every spring. Dozens of accidents involving students' red or blue painted vans and buses are reported every year, and sometimes the celebrations lead to crashes killing those aged just 18 or 19. While the list of rituals involved in the Rust celebrations vary from one school to the next, they almost always invariably involve alcohol, nudity, and sex. What the hell was this kind of shit when we were in high school? In a statement titled No to Sex on Roundabouts, a former Minister of Transport who now runs the PRA said, "Everyone understands that being in and around roundabouts is a traffic hazard. It may not be so dangerous for someone to be without clothes on the bridge, but drivers can get too much of a surprise and completely forget they are driving," he added. Yeah, don't be kidding me there, man. Holy cow, do we got weird people around the world. And that's the news on this episode of Motorcycle Madhouse Around the World.
And welcome back, and you know what? Welcome back to the real world. That strange news segment that they run is just something else. But we're joined with Dave Walters. You know, he has that motorcyclism, as Good Time Charlie says, history down pat. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Hollister and a little bit more about the early history of bikers and how it all went down during World War II, before then and after that. How you doing, Dave?
I'm good. How you doing, Hollywood?
Yeah, pretty good, man. Pretty good. So let's jump right into this, man. You know what? You're an encyclopedia on this, and I think it's important for everybody out there to get to know the facts and to, get rid of some of the, rumors and all that kind of stuff that was put out there in the early days and get to know what really happened. And you're the man we're going to go to. So can you give us an overview of what you got?
I like, what is that, Double Barrel once on your show, it said nobody should ever call themselves an expert. And I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that, especially I think when you're dealing something with history and especially motorcycle history, how much of it is fact versus just very cool legends and myths and everything else. And I think that's probably what interests me the most, to keep on learning, is I feel like every day I can learn something new. And, if you're out there and you are in a club, man, all of us should be hopefully asking those old guys, those gray beards and those original members, if they're left, some of the history, so that this shit, isn't lost. And maybe sometimes we get more than just, hearsay and we get a little bit more fact behind it. I think the coolest part, maybe it's just me, the coolest part about this life is some of the history that goes along with it, and I want to help preserve it in any way I can. By no means is anything that I've ever researched or come up with 100% infallible. I'm always open to someone else's input or insight, something I may not know. So by no means am I an expert, but I absolutely I love this shit. I live for it. I could eat motorcycle history, morning, noon, and night. And I especially love the early periods, like you're talking about, looking at stuff like, the Gypsy Tours and Hollister, and kind of how all that kind of stuff came about after the culture that kind of evolved out of World War II. Hollister wasn't the first rally. It wasn't the first time something had ever been put on. The Gypsy Tours, I think, have been going on, and somebody can correct me on this, absolutely. I believe since 1917, maybe a little bit earlier, the Federation of American Motorcyclists were putting on some Gypsy Tours. I think it was Laconia might have been the first one back in like 1917. And again, that's just some of the stuff that I've come up with. People can correct me on that. And they were called.
Before we go on, what's a Gypsy Tour for those that don't know who are just getting new to the lifestyle?
So Gypsy Tour is an AMA event. Well, nowadays it's an AMA event. Before it would have been, the Federation of American Motorcyclists and then the AMA in 25 or whatever. And it was called the Gypsy Tour basically just because of the distance that people traveled. And they would camp and have bonfires and all this stuff and put on biker games, races, hill climbs, time trials, that kind of stuff. And that really, they were gypsies that came in for these events, and hence the Gypsy Tour.
A lot of stuff that's been lost today that, these bigger rallies took over.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, perfect example, like you said, Sturgis and the Jack Pine Gypsies, which of course the legendary Pappy Hoyle, who kind of started Sturgis, was a member of the Jack Pine Gypsies Motorcycle Club, and they started hosting Gypsy Tours that, like you said, kind of turned into the behemoth that is Sturgis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you know what? Before we go on a little more stuff with you, one burning question out there, and you addressed it in one of your articles, is the 1%er designation. Was that from the AMA?
Again, one of those awesome things is kind of up to myth and legend and maybe a little bit lost to history. There's reports out there that the AMA had almost been, and there's always been a little bit of animosity between certain groups of rebel bikers and the AMA. The AMA had been using the term outlaw for, I think since like the late 20s is kind of some of the stuff that I found. It was being pushed as early as the early 20s by the Federation of American Motorcyclists and then the AMA as a way to almost shame bikers that weren't a part of the AMA and weren't participating and paying dues and kind of on the registry rolls and things like that and attending. They were hosting these unsanctioned events, which of course the term outlaw events comes to be. So I think, out of Hollister, there's no record. There is no recorded record anywhere of the AMA saying that that the 1% of motorcyclists was causing all the ruckus. Anybody that's familiar with Dr. Delaney, he is kind of I think he teaches at the Air Force College now, or he had previously or something like that. He's a veteran, a motorcycle historian, kind of a cultural anthropologist and stuff like that. He puts down some really good information on that as far as a couple of interviews that came out about the AMA incident and where the term, the idea of the 1%er kind of came from. Do we have time to, do you want me to expand on that, or is that all you want me to go on?
No, this is a subject that a lot of people out there would like to hear about.
Yeah, and I think, like Dr. Delaney says, you see between the obviously famous photograph in Life magazine, taken by Barney Peterson of Eddie Davenport kind of drunk on the motorcycle. Between that photograph and Life and then, kind of some of the other stuff, it just took on a life of its own and became that 99% versus the 1%. And if we kind of start with Eddie on his motorcycle, that's not even Eddie's motorcycle. Eddie Davenport, the gentleman on the motorcycle in that famous picture.
That was a staged photograph.
Yeah, and Barney Pearson, who had taken the photograph, it sat for like 3 or 4 weeks or something like that in the San Francisco Chronicle before it was even picked up by Life magazine. And nobody at the time, for those first few weeks, really cared. They had, big news was coming out of how Japan was kind of reorganizing. I think there was like some kind of union strikes going on that were big at the time, and that kind of dominated the headlines. And then Life had this section where they published kind of a what's happening sort of thing with photographs and not a whole lot of backdrop or words to it. And that's kind of what blew up the picture for Barney, is because no real words went along with it. So the public could just kind of take from it what they will. And there's a really cool story of a guy. There's a cool story of the younger gentleman with the black hair in the back of the famous picture. His name is Gus, and he was a Hollister resident. And he was the one that kind of started the whole the picture is staged phenomenon, and he was there and he saw him kind of spreading the beer bottles around, and he saw Barney, who may or may not have already known Eddie Davenport, kind of getting him to get on the bike, and whether or not Davenport was really drunk or they gave him the beers to hold on to during the picture and stuff like that is really just a cool thing.
Propaganda, basically.
And I think
wasn't it in 2003 or 2005 when the AMA came out saying they had no record of that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. The AMA, they said that they actually released a famous, or I guess semi-famous press release that they said at this point it's basically, who cares? It's already accepted fact. But for what it's worth, we have no published records in our archives of any statement from the AMA ever saying that. And really, I think what that comes to, talking about Dr. Delaney, I kind of got off track there. And everybody knows this guy. I would love to chat with him. He just inspires me all the time. I love the works that this dude puts out. But he cites in his works, he wrote a doctoral dissertation for Florida State, and he talks about 2 letters that were written to Life magazine that probably more affected the fabrication of the 99 versus the 1% than anything else. There was an editor of the magazine Motorcyclist. And he writes to Life, and he talks about him and some of his colleagues, and he doesn't claim that any of his colleagues are from the AMA. This dude that wrote the letter is not from the AMA, but he talks about how it was just some unruly citizens, the 4,000 motorcyclists that showed up. He says a small percentage of them were unruly, where everybody else was law-abiding and family-going and stuff like that. But he never says what percentage or anything like that. But you can obviously see between the picture and this letter to the editor how the idea of a 1% myth would take hold. And then there's another one, Mr. Charles Adams.
Another, I guess after listening to Wino's interview, Hollister was actually expecting all these motorcyclists. It wasn't like in the Wild one where they just showed up and caused trouble. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there's a letter to Life, the second one that Mr. Delaney cites, where the guy writes in and says, it was probably 50% members of the AMA and 50% motorcyclists who were just out for a 3-day holiday. And the guy says less than 400 of those even made a debacle of the street racing or drunkenness and all that, which even that number is a little bit high. If you look at the Hollister police records, they say 60 motorcyclists were arrested for misdemeanors, and there was about 6 injuries, all from racing and bike events. So, but when you start
goes to show everybody the power of propaganda when
exactly, and I think it ties in perfectly. It ties in perfectly to some of the stuff you talk about today. We still see propaganda against bikers. I think who you had Rooster on. Rooster Katana the other day, he talked about how police profiling was probably worse in the 70s and 80s than it is nowadays. It's just more, we see it on social media. We have more ways to capture it. Where back then there was no checks and balances. Cops could put a shotgun to the back of your neck and nobody's going to record it. There are no cell phones. It's your word against theirs. And right. I think you see a lot of that on a smaller scale when it comes to the Hollister riot. They had permits to street race. Like you mentioned, the town loved having this come in. It was big revenue. You're talking about a farm town that had maybe 4,000 residents at the time, 5,000. All of a sudden they get an influx of bikers who need hotel rooms. They need to eat. They need to drink. Guys were, they talk about guys sleeping in alleyways. Bartenders were renting out their back alleys so people could pitch campsites. They weren't vagabonds who just fell down in your alleyway. They paid money to put sleeping rolls down there.
Now, how was it during World War II? Because a lot of these events, stopped during World War II because, like you said, the steel and all that was not allowed, and there was a lot of rationing.
Yeah. They obviously a lot of that stuff, your metals and your steels and your aluminums used for automobiles and motorcycles and things like that were going to the war effort. And not only that, but your men that would be riding these bikes back then are fighting the war effort. So the Gypsy Tours went away from 42 or 43 until almost 47, I think, is when they started up again. So you've got a 3 or 4 year period. And not only that, you think about the emergence of the motorcycle became so popular after World War II because, automobiles hadn't really kickstarted again yet. We're still kind of coming out of that whole rationing thing. Guys were coming home. They're basically getting dropped off in California and then hey, find your way home. So you've got these guys with a little bit of money in their pockets, the cheapest mode of transportation and easily accessible is a motorcycle, and they're getting dropped off in California. On Independence Day, what else are you going to do but ride your motorcycle to go find a party? And in the 30s, they'd expect 1,000, maybe 1,500 motorcycle members. All of a sudden, you've got 4,000 combat vets with more easily accessible motorcycles and some money in their pocket. They just weren't prepared for that, and I think that kind of helps add to that growing myth and that legend. And I don't want it any other way. I love the story, how it is, and people say, well, it's a black eye for the biker community and all. I think we're past that. I think it's just a very cool niche in our history that kind of grows the legend and grows the myth. And I think as long as you look at it objectively from all the different angles, it's just it's something very cool to kind of study up and learn about.
Right. Now, who were some of the other clubs that were at Hollister? Wasn't it Rebels 13 and a couple more?
Oh, there's so many famous, like, when you think about this life, just so many famous clubs that kind of attended that. Yeah, the 13 Rebels, obviously the Boozefighters were there, clubs like the Jackrabbit, Sharks, Top Hatters, I think the Galloping Goose, I think, had attended and stuff like that. I mean, just some of these clubs that are just so famous coming out of the 20s, 30s, and early 40s.
Which ones of those are still around?
I think most of those are still around. The Pissed Off Bastards, the Market Street Commandos, I think they went on to form some HA chapters, but have been kind of revived. I'm not sure about the Market Street Commandos, but there are some chapters of the Pissed Off Bastards. Obviously, the Goose is still around. 13 Rebels, I think, have an 81-year AMA charter, something like that, 82 years of being AMA chartered. Obviously, we all know the Boozefighters are still around. The Top Hatters are still around. The Jackrabbits and the Sharks, I'm not as familiar with. I'm not sure if they're still around, so I don't want to misspeak and offend anybody that might be a part of those clubs. I'm just, that's just one of those things that I don't know because I am not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast.
Right. Well, for those who, again, are just joining the program and maybe new to the motorcycle community, what is AMA chartered compared to the other charter type of motorcycle clubs out there?
So, and like we talked about with the outlaw designation, was just people that didn't want to pay dues and be on the registry rolls of the AMA, and the AMA would shame them and call them outlaws, and their events were unsanctioned. So they meant the term to be dirty at the time. This is a dirty event, and you don't want to be a part of it because it's outlawed. And really, again, it comes down to, in my mind, propaganda. Somebody that was AMA chartered would, they had like a code of conduct they wanted them to adhere to. They had dues that they had to pay, maybe not only the club membership had dues they had to pay, but you also had to pay to the AMA a fee. There were certain rules if you were going to put on a run or an event, a race that you would have to follow and things like that. And you still see that today. I think the animosity of the AMA trying to shame other clubs has gone away. I think that would be a horrible PR disaster today for them to do it. Obviously, some clubs still carry that animosity or that attitude towards the AMA, and you can understand why. And some clubs, they love being AMA chartered. They use it to help put on runs and events and organize field races and things like that, which is great for the life. I think in the last few years, I think there's been a huge boom of, even if they're not necessarily AMA sanctioned, those type of events coming back. The hill climbs, the TT and flat track racing, some of the biker games like the slow rolls and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you're seeing those come back into more popularity.
Right. Now, those, anybody who hasn't seen a hill climb or a flat track race, they're missing out, that I can tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Those hill climbs are something else, man. Those guys, they got balls of steel, if you ask me. But after, Hollister happened, how did the scene start to change?
Well, again, you kind of had those that were more of I'm not sure the term that I'm using here is correct, but just for the sake of the argument, I'll say more family-oriented types that were trying to maybe distance themselves from some of the shenanigans that went on in Hollister. Whether that was right or wrong is anybody's thing. But then, the very next year, you have the Riverside Riot. And the Riverside Riot was like the riot, again, that just like Hollister, is a riot that wasn't. There was I think 50 or 40 arrests or something like that happened for the Riverside Riot. And there was one death. There was, unfortunately, one death attributed to Riverside that was written about in the paper. It was a car accident that happened 100 miles away from the Riverside rally, but it was attributed to the to the riot at Riverside in the paper. They said that this death was responsible from the Riverside rally.
Right. Now,
I don't know how that works. I don't know how a car accident 100 miles away makes you responsible at your rally, but apparently in the 1948 newspapers, that was the thing.
Well, that's what I was just going to bring up. A lot of people don't understand the culture back then of America is like about 360 than what it is today.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
What they would consider bad back then, we would consider like, what the hell are you talking about today?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and back then they would talk about the injuries from these rowdy rallies and these unkempt bikers and everything else, but when you kind of do the history on it, the injuries were from the sanctioned racing, which is inherent in any sport that you play or any activity you do, and the unkempt bikers, well, you were charging them money to sleep behind your bar. I mean, I don't know a whole lot of bars with some outdoor showers, but you know, these guys obviously are just there to hang out with their buddies, have some fun, drink a few beers. After World War II, who the hell can blame them? And after you take their money, you're calling them dirty and unkempt and unruly.
Right. Now, everybody knows the movie The Wild One. If they haven't seen it yet or heard about it, then they must be in outer space or something like that. But the Marlon Brando character, that was based on Wino, wasn't it?
So the thing that I always read, and again, one of those myths, legends, and realities, was that Wino was kind of based off of Chino. Chino was kind of based off of Wino and Lee Marvin, and then Brando was actually kind of formed or molded after a member of the 13 Rebels by the name of Tex Bryant, who was one of the founders.
That's something I didn't even know. Wow.
Who's Tex Bryant? And if that's just for publicity's sake, whatever, I don't know. Maybe a member of the 13 Rebels or the Boozefighters would know better than I. That's just kind of a story that I've always seen. And Tex was one of the founders of the 13 Rebels, who, of course, were one of the top-seeded 13 AMA racers in California at the time when they formed. So Tex and Wino had been in the same club. They had been 13 Rebels together. And the 13 Rebels, the story kind of always has that implication where we're much more serious about their racing. Wino loved to race and he loved to party, and sometimes the two overlapped each other, and that was a little bit more than what the Rebels were willing to put up with. They wanted to race first and take it seriously and party after. Because these guys were very top seed, you know, they were very serious about their racing. They're top seeded guys. They're winning prize money. They're winning, you know, national championships and things like that. The 13 Rebels, I think nowadays have 4 AMA Hall of Fame racers or something like that in there that were a part of their club. Mm-hmm. So the story goes, Wino got it a little too, and again, like, how much of this is myth or fact? Wino got a little bit too inebriated before race. Plowed his way or snuck his way or somehow got onto the racetrack on a bike, did a couple laps, took back off, might have taken out a gate or something like that, and went back to partying. And that was kind of the last straw for the 13 Rebels, and they asked him to leave or kicked him out, and he formed the Boozefighters, obviously. And then the story goes that Chino was a little bit more wild, so he was based off of Willie. And Tex Bryant was a little bit more serious, and that was kind of the basis for Brando's character, whether or not there's any truth to that or not.
You know, that's an interview I'd love to get as somebody from the 13 Rebels and the Boozefighters, man. You know, the history is just wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if that story is complete fabrication that was just helped to promote the movie, it's still an awesome part of club history that, you know, all the animosity towards it should be gone. Those guys, they get along now. They party. You know, that was a story back then, was that they still partied then, and that it was just used to sell movies and stuff like that. So either way, it's become kind of a part of, as a biker, it's become part of the legend, and I think it's cool to hear about it. It doesn't necessarily always have to be 100% factual, as long as it's, you know, kind of showing the history of where we come from and things that influenced our culture. And I had no doubt that the Wild One certainly influenced the culture.
Right. You know, it's kind of funny how the culture was back then compared to what it is now. It just seems like it was more freewheeling back then, more fun. and there wasn't that many beefs, and if there was beefs, you have a fist fight, and afterwards have a beer. But things sure have changed.
Yeah, and like I talk about Dr. Delaney as being a huge, somebody that I love to read about. Bill Hayes, who I believe is a booze fighter, is also a kind of a legendary writer and kind of historian and stuff like that. He's wrote the Tales of the Original Wild Ones. He wrote the encyclopedia, the One Percenters Encyclopedia. He's got the Myth and Fact book out, a couple of other ones. Bill Hayes, and he tells some great stories about the early days as well. And he talks about a booze fighter that, Gil and another booze fighter named C.B. Clausen, they wanted to go to the rally or the races in Daytona. And they had like $1.50, and they're in Southern California, and they had like $1.50 between them. And they're like, well, shit, we can't get to Daytona on $1.50. So they come up with this plan. They had some overhauled bikes with some stroker engines in them, and they come up with this plan that they were going to drag race people because the bikes were kind of sleepers. They didn't really look like they were going to blow your doors off or anything like that. So they drag race guys from California to Daytona. And they wanted to make so much money before they got to Daytona that they'd be able just to come right back to California because they were afraid if they stopped the race again, guys would be onto them and they'd be in for a fight. So they did. They managed to win enough prize money to make it to Daytona and back to California. And the legend from Bill Hayes goes that when they got back to the Big A, the bar that they hung out at, they emptied their pockets and still had about $500 between the two of them from the drag racing.
Right. Well, you know what?
It's stuff like that I love, no matter what club or 99%, 1% AMA, non-AMA. I mean, stories like that that's the stuff that I love.
Right. It's just more freewheeling, man. What the biker life should be. But you know what? You're such a wealth of information, and I know we're on a time thing right now. I'd like to have you back next episode and continue this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And your show, I love listening to it. If you get a chance to find some 13 Rebels, some Blues Fighters, some Top Hatters, something like that could speak more intelligently about Hollister and history than I can, that's something that I would definitely love to hear and tune into.
Well, you know what? You can bet I'm going to be shooting out emails. I'm actually on the 13 Rebels MC website right now, looking at their contact information because, history is something that we all need to know, and it's just amazing how those guys were back then compared to what it is today. So,
and I think getting guys like Dr. Delaney, Bill Hayes, some other ones that are out there. I like John Hall's book and stuff like that. The majority of the literature that's out there that kind of surrounds the motorcycle community, it focuses on bullshit and this antisocial behavior or this very small element of criminal activities or something like that of this subculture, and very few people are putting out the positive spin out there of the history or the good things or just the brotherhood and the life. And, not everything has to be focused on a tell-all to sell books or something like that or to make a movie. Focus on our history, focus on the good stuff that's going on, focus on the bonds and the brotherhood. I mean, people, if you're going to write a book, I'd rather read about that and the history of your club. I don't care what club you are, I'll read your history than, some lawyer or something like that who's going to make a few bucks selling some bullshit story about a criminal element or something like that. That makes up such a small percentage.
Well, you're right. You know what? The biker community, independence club, whatever they're in, you know what? They do so much charity work. They do more than the government does for people. And all the media wanted to do is throw a narrative out there that, this very small percentage of anybody who's involved in that kind of stuff, represents the whole community as a whole. That's just wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it doesn't have to be 99%, like the independence, 1%. I mean, you can combine them all, and the amount of people that are doing piss poor stuff or kind of giving a black eye to the community or whatever is such a minute fraction compared to all the cool stories of racing, brotherhood, riding state to state and stuff like that. That makes up such a larger percentage. I want to see people focus on that.
Well, it does, and you know what? And I think a lot of people are starting to focus more on that because you can, doing the Madhouse and, throwing out the stories like we do on Unchained Throttle, you can see a lot of the people are, they're just getting away from, that section of the biker community. They're more interested in, moving forward, doing good for people, and nobody wants to sit there and go to prison anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a certain aspect of the culture like, oh, well, you're in this mom and pop, or you're in this, or you're in that makes it different. I think there's good people all across the board, and we need to focus more on that.
Yeah, focus more on that instead of politics and stuff like that. But, you know what, I really appreciate you having on, Dave, and I'm going to bring you back, and we're going to, go on a little more about Hollister, because that's something that we talk about forever. Especially if I get somebody from the 13 Rebels or the Boozefighters on. And moving forward through, the early 50s and 60s is, I think another time period in the history of bikers that really started forming, the outlaw image.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it before, not to hold you up here, but, when you look at the difference in the culture shifts and what was happening in the turn of the century when motorcycles were becoming more popular, some of the early 1900 whatever clubs that were coming out in the 20s and the 30s, and then the boom after World War II and guys coming back from these just horrific battlefields and things like that. And then, again, seeing the change in the culture and kind of how we love the World War II veteran, and we welcomed them home and threw them parades, and they probably got laid in the streets. And then, the Vietnam vet came home, and it's like you didn't even want to tell people that you were a Vietnam vet, and kind of how that changed the motorcycle community. And then, in the 80s, we see kind of a decline or the last breath of things like, steel and manufacturing and coal, and kind of how it's on its way out, and how those hard times shaped the motorcycle community. And now we see guys like myself that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're kind of welcomed home, and then we're kind of not welcome home, and everybody wants to shake our hand because it's cool on TV, but then we kind of don't want to talk about the war kind of thing and social media and all that, how it changes the perception of the new biker that's coming out. And I think all these different time periods are just really cool to look at. I know you've done a little bit of that.
Yeah, we're going to be focusing a lot more on history and stuff like that, the good angle instead of all the bad stuff. One interesting interview, on the last episode was Zeke. He was a Korean War vet, and, hearing from guys like that is what we're really going to start focusing on now.
Yeah, I loved hearing Zeke's stories about the old clubs that he was in back in the day, and how they would just go somewhere and like field race and then hang out in the grass and drink some beers or something like that. I loved hearing that story and hearing stuff like that. And I think you asked him, are you wishing, are you glad you came up when you did back in the day? I think he said something like, shit, yeah, I'm glad. There's no way I want to be a biker. I'd want to be coming up in today's society or something like that. He liked it way back when. He's like, I'm glad I'm as old as I am.
Well,
I thought that was pretty good.
Back then it was based on different values back then than it is now.
Yeah.
Now it's all, SOA bullshit, and, I think a lot of the young ones really need to get into the history to know, hey, MCs weren't built around that.
Yeah, and I've touched on it before. It's a two-part process. Us younger guys, we have to be, the image of us is kind of maybe more me now generation. We're a little bit more, maybe we're hot-headed or we're know-it-alls or whatever. We have to, think or, listen twice as much as you talk, and listen to the graybeards while they're still here. And some of the graybeards, you just want to bitch about our generations and this and that. Stop and open up and teach us and find that common ground where the young guys, bring them in that want to listen and discard the ones that don't. And for the young guys, find the graybeards that want to teach you and eat that shit up, soak it up.
Exactly. Well, you know what? They need to go find themselves a Vietnam vet graybeard, because those are the ones that tell you like it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, I think
they're
you said something about
starting to age out right now, which is sad, because most of the W2 vets in a couple of years will be gone. But, the Korean Vietnam vets are really what people should be looking at.
Yeah, and you look at the difference too. The average age of the vet that went to World War II was 26, and then the average guy going to Vietnam was 19. I mean, so just the difference in your maturity level, kind of like how your brain is. I mean, between 19 and 26 is a huge jump, and I think that kind of plays into what kind of veteran we got back, and what they had to see, and then of course how the different society was in welcoming them back. I think all plays a role into changing the biker culture too.
Right. Well, you know what? I appreciate having you on, Dave. And, you know what? Like I said, next episode, I'm going to reach out to you and we'll continue this conversation, because, you know what? It's real interesting and it's something everybody out there needs to know.
Well, feel free to bump me off in order to put more booze fighters and rebels and sharks and top hatters. And if I find any jackrabbits or jackpine gypsies, feel free to bump me for those guys.
I'm going to be looking for it, man. I'm going to be sending out the media request today.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks, Dave.
Have a good day.
You too.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Motorcycle Madhouse. Don't forget to go over to Insane Throttle's new YouTube channel and check me out over on Biker Angle. Also get your daily dose of biker news every morning at HarleyLiberty.com. If you haven't done so already, go like the new Motorcycle Madhouse Facebook page. And until next week, I'm James Hollywood Machikari, and remember, keep that throttle cracked wide open.